Hope. What is hope? You know, usually, and I've mentioned this before in the last couple of weeks, but we use the word hope differently than the way the Bible uses the word hope. We use the word hope in the idea of we wish. I hope it doesn't rain today. I hope you're feeling better. I hope I get that promotion. But with God, hope is something you expect and you're waiting for. We don't hope for bad things. It's something good to come in the future, something better than now, something you're longing for, something that you have confidence that's going to happen, something that you have trust in. To hope is to wait for something good, and by that definition, Christians always have hope. Hope is a consoling dream which causes you to forget your present troubles. Hope sees the invisible, feels the intangible, achieves the impossible. Hope is the anchor of the soul, the stimulus to action, the incentive to achievement. Hope gives purpose. It gives inspiration. It gives life. Without hope, what purpose is there? If better days never come, then what reason is there to pretend like it is? You see, there's an experiment that was done by a bunch of graduate students. It sounds pretty menacing. I don't like the idea that it happened, but it happened and we need to learn from it. So they took a bunch of lab rats. They put them in a tank of water. All they could do was swim around. And they put them in a completely dark room. And so they let them sit in the water for 6 hours. And they waited to see how long the lab rats would take them to drown. Again, I don't like the idea that this happened. I wouldn't be okay with it happening. But there's a good lesson here. The lab rats drowned around 6 hours in the pitch black. The students took another set of lab rats, put them in a tank of water, and placed them in a tank where they had a small lamp. And their hypothesis was that the light would give the rats hope and they would survive longer. In pitch black, the lab rats only lasted 6 hours. With light, they swam almost 17 hours. That much longer because they had hope. They had light, and it enabled them to survive longer. And I think there's a great lesson in that. Hope is what strengthens you. One of my favorite books I've ever read was by Viktor Frankl. He was a psychiatrist who went through the Holocaust. He was in Auschwitz. And he said, reading the events of a Holocaust survivor is something that I think everyone should do, make you appreciate life. And he said, the people that survived the Holocaust were not the strong. They were not the smart. They were not the most equipped. They were those who had hope, those who had family that they longed to see, those who believed that this would come to an end, those who had faith in God. You see, there's hope for a brighter tomorrow than today's easier. When we are hoping in God, we're trusting God to provide for us and care for us. We can hope in God in a non-specific way, like to hope that God is going to help you, to protect you from evil. But it's in those darkest times that hope shines the brightest. Hope means hoping when things are hopeless. When times are bright and positive, hope is almost a hollow platitude. But it's whenever everything is hopeless that hope is strong. Hope requires strength. Hope requires being firm in faith, trusting in the Lord, even when the world is crashing down. Hope is putting faith to work when doubting would be so much easier. True hope is hope in hopelessness. Hope against hope. And there's one book that reminds me of hope, I think more than any other. I think it was last week I mentioned the book of Jeremiah. Well, I'm mentioning Jeremiah again because I think Jeremiah is so connected to this idea of hope. And the book that reminds me of hopelessness more than any others is the book of Lamentations. Before you get to understand Lamentations, I think you need to know the history. Lamentations has that one passage that is so well known, the song we just sang. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul, therefore I will hope in him. And if you just read this verse alone, you would get the idea that Lamentations is quite a beautiful and joyous book. For those of you who have read Lamentations, you know it's not. I mean, when you hear the word Lamentations, does it sound joyous? You know what the word lament means? To moan, to grieve, to mourn, to express sorrow. And so it's like a book of grieving. So it's not as joyful as this verse makes you see. And I kind of want to dive into the background of this and look at the context of this book, and then we're going to come back to this passage and we're going to fully understand how this is such a good passage on hope. So here's some history, and I know when I say history, everyone's like, oh boy, here we go. I know, I didn't like history class either, but don't try to memorize all the names and the dates. Try to understand what this time period was like. And I'm going to go through a little bit of the timeline. 640, you have Josiah, king of Judah. He was a great, great king, probably the best they had. And though he was the son, he sought to rid the nations of all their idols, and he wanted to bring the nation back to God. Well, 640, he becomes king at a young age. 609, he dies in a war against Egypt. The nation mourns the good king. Josiah's son becomes king. Egypt places him as king, Jehoahaz. And one of the frustrating things about history is that all the names sound very similar. Jehoahaz his father, Josiah, was a great king, but Jehoahaz was a very evil king. Moving down, Jehoahaz, in just the very same year that he was made king, he was taken captive by Egypt. After only 3 months, he was taken captive. And so Egypt decided to replace Jehoahaz as king. Could you imagine another king coming to America and saying, yeah, we beat you in war, we're going to replace your president, right? So that's what's going on. When you got defeated in war, they got to set the terms. Either they're going to take you captive, they're going to take everything you have, or they're going to put a king over you, and sometimes a mixture of those. So Jehoahaz was taken captive by Egypt. And so in place, they put Jehoiakim. And he is really not that much better than Jehoahaz. And so he reigned for 11 years. Jehoiakim was conceited, hard-hearted, wicked man, the opposite of Josiah, right? Who was also his father. He refused to listen to God, and this king tried to kill the prophet Jeremiah several times. Further down in history, 605, this is the first deportation by Babylon. Jehoiakim the king is captured. What happened is that Babylon came down, invaded Judah, and conquered them. This is Nebuchadnezzar that you read about in the book of Daniel. He's the king of Babylon. And he comes in, he defeats the nation in war, and he decides, I'm taking some of your people. He takes people like Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, who had better names before they were taken. And King Jehoiakim was taken as captive. Could you imagine losing a war and your king gets captured? Right? I mean, that is a devastating defeat. And so Nebuchadnezzar decided, okay, well, Jehoiakim, you can be king, but you serve us now. And that worked for a little bit, but 4 years later, Jehoiakim said, you know that nation that beat me up? I don't think we need to follow them anymore. And you can imagine how that goes, right? Nebuchadnezzar was angry. And he's like, all right, if you're not going to listen, we're just going to siege your city. We're going to surround your city and make sure you don't get any supplies, and wait until you decide to change your mind. And in the course of this, Jehoiakim is killed. He died in disgrace. Let me take a break right here. So, throwing a lot of names and dates at you. But really what I'm trying to get across, things are crazy, right? I mean, this is all happening so quickly, in quick succession, right? It was 609 when Josiah died. You have another king, he's evil. He dies in war. Another king, he's evil. Well, we get defeated in another war. He gets captured, he comes back. He rebels. Well, another war. All of that within a span of 5 years. You know, while I was writing this sermon, I was thinking to myself, you know, we as Americans live in a very crazy time right now. I don't care what your side is, but we have people who are doubting our elections, and we have a former president who is being indicted and another that's being accused of bribery. These are crazy times right now, but they do not compare to these times. Imagine the kings dying, kings being taken captured, another nation replacing your king. These are so much crazier times than what we're living in right now. Imagine just being a person in the country saying, I'm just trying to live life, right? And you got your king over there making trouble for you. I feel like we can relate because they're so much worse. And so, moving on. Jehoiakim's son, Jehoiachin, also known as Jeconiah, became king of Judah, and he only ruled for 3 months. And after only 3 months, Babylon came again. And Babylon said, yeah, I took a bunch of people the first time, I'm taking more people this time. In fact, I'm going to take all the treasures, I'm going to go into the temple, and I'm going to take everything of value there. I'm going to go into the royal palace, and I'm going to take all the gold, all the silver. And he's like, and you know what? We're going to take a lot of people with us this time. All the officers, all the fighting men, all the skilled workers, the artisans, they took 10,000 people captive and said, these people are going to work for us now in our country. They almost wiped out all the nation. Only the poorest of the poor are left. Things keep getting worse and worse. Same year, right after that, Nebuchadnezzar replaced the king, put Zedekiah up there. And of course, it never goes well. Zedekiah said, let's rebel against Babylon. And Babylon says, this is the last straw. We're going to take care of this once and for all. So he sieges them, again cutting off all travel supply lines, and this time Jerusalem experiences a famine. It keeps getting worse and worse until the very end. Babylon says, all right, we're done. We're going to destroy the walls. We're going to destroy the temple. We're going to destroy everything. And only the luckiest of the lucky remain because they fled to Egypt. And I want you to think about all this. They go through so many wars and kings in just a span of 20 years. Some kings only made it for a couple of years. Some kings only made it for a couple of months. You're just trying to live your life, and politics is making it crazy. You wish for peace. Imagine living in this time. Imagine your home being invaded. Imagine it being plundered again and again. Imagine seeing the king of your people taken captive, killed, replaced time after time. Imagine other nations coming about and taking your wealth. All the political figures are taken. The army and any able man that's able to fight is taken. Any person who has a trade that is valuable is taken. Imagine your loved ones being taken away, if not killed. Imagine seeing the walls of your town that you grew up in, that you depended on for security, broken down. Imagine seeing the temple, everything that connected you to God, being burned to the ground. This is a period of lamentation. This is a terrible, terrible time. I throw up the timeline just to communicate how bad this time is. Jeremiah came to this town. Jeremiah is a prophet of God, and he knew this was going to happen all along. For 40 years, he was preaching to this nation. And he said, listen, you have to follow God. He says, if you do not follow God, this is going to happen. And all along the way, they said no. And Jeremiah says, you don't understand what's coming. And they said, nothing's coming. We're perfectly fine. God is very happy with us. The people didn't listen. And Jeremiah, he witnessed kings rise up and fall down. Out of the 5 kings, 4 of them were evil, and one of them tried to kill him. He witnessed wars where his brothers and sisters died. He witnessed the nation plunge into sin, getting further and further away from God. He told them, this is how you avoid the wrath of God. But nothing stopped it, and God's wrath came. And now his home, a city once lively and blessed, is now desolate and destroyed. And this is the context of Jeremiah writing Lamentations. Lamentations is Jeremiah's book where he mourns the death of his homeland, where he mourns the death of the country that he lived in and all the people. The book of Lamentations is as depressing as it sounds. He's crying out. He's questioning God. He's confused by the horrors he's seen. He's seen people slaughtered in front of him, people fearing for their lives, wondering whether they're going to see tomorrow, children starving, people killing each other for a morsel of bread, people even resorting to cannibalism because they're starving. Lamentations. Let's read. I want to read a chunk of it so you kind of have this understanding. Starts off this way. How lonely sits the city that was full of people. How like a widow has she become, she who is great among the nations, she who is princess among the provinces, has become a slave. She weeps bitterly in the night with tears on her cheeks. Among all her lovers, she has none to comfort her. All her friends have dealt treacherously with her. They have become her enemies. Judah has gone into exile because of affliction and hard servitude. She dwells now among the nations, but finds no resting place. Her pursuers have all overtaken her in the midst of her distress. The roads to Zion, Jerusalem, mourn. For none can come to the festival. All her gates are desolate. Her priests groan. Her virgins have been afflicted, and she herself suffers bitterly. Her foes have become the head. Her enemies prosper, because the Lord has afflicted her for the multitude of her transgressions. Her children have gone away, captives before the foe. From the daughters of Zion all her majesty has departed. Her princes have become like deer that find no pasture. They fled without strength before the pursuer. Jerusalem remembers in the days of her affliction and wandering all the precious things that were hers from days of old. When her people fell into the hand of the foe, there was none to help her. Her foes gloated over her. They mocked at her downfall. Jerusalem sinned grievously, and therefore she became filthy. All who honored her despise her. They have seen her nakedness. She herself groans and turns her face away. Her uncleanness was in her skirts. She took no thought of her future. Therefore her fall is terrible. She has no comforter. He says to God, O Lord, behold my affliction, for the enemy has triumphed. The enemy has stretched out his hands over all her precious things, for she has seen the nations enter her sanctuary. Those whom you forbade to enter your congregation, all her people groan as they search for bread. They made their treasures for food to revive their strength. He says again, look, O Lord, and see, for I am despised. Pretty joyous stuff, huh? Right? I mean, can you write something more sad than that? He is mourning for the people that have been lost. He's grieving. These are words of hurt. These are words that come from a man whose heart is broken. He's grieving over the tragedy that really would have been prevented if only they had listened. This pain he's feeling, and in my opinion, I think one of the worst pains is when you know how to help someone and they won't listen. And you see someone you love doing what hurts them, doing what causes them trouble in the end, and you see it coming, but they don't believe you. I want to jump to chapter 3. We're going to get to that verse that we all know, but I'm trying to get to the context. So the verse we all know, of course, the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. When you read chapter 1, you're like, how does that nice, beautiful, joyous passage fit into this sad book, right? At this point in Lamentations, you're like, it doesn't seem like there's any hope. Why are those verses even from Lamentations? They are. So I want to jump over to chapter 3. I am the man who has seen affliction under the rod of his wrath. He has driven and brought me into darkness without any light. Surely against me he turns his hands again and again the whole day long. He has made my flesh and my skin waste away. He has broken my bones. He has besieged and enveloped me with bitterness and tribulation. He has made me dwell in darkness like the dead of long ago. He has walled me about so that I cannot escape. He has made my chains heavy. Though I call and cry for help, he shuts out my prayer. He has blocked my ways with blocks of stone. He has made my paths crooked. And so here, let me stop for a second. You see how he's kind of blaming God for it all, right? He's kind of talking about his enemy, but he's also kind of talking about God. These are the words of someone who's hurting. These are not necessarily the words of someone who's thinking clearly. And so he's trying to grasp what is going on, and he's coming to God in this prayer, this public prayer, where he's saying, God, I'm really frustrated. God, it feels like you're just picking on me. And you're going to see how through this process of praying to God and expressing his frustration to God, you're going to see how kind of the Spirit works in him and helps him gain some clarity. We're going to continue. He is a bear lying in wait for me, a lion in hiding. He turned aside my steps and tore me to pieces. He has made me desolate. He bent his bow and set me as a target for his arrow. He drove into my kidneys the arrows of his quiver. I have become the laughing stock of all people, the object of their taunts all day long. He has filled me with bitterness. He has sated me with wormwood. He has made my teeth grind on gravel, made me cower in ashes. My soul is bereft of peace. I have forgotten what happiness is. So I say, my endurance has perished. So is my hope from the Lord. You hear the words, my soul is bereft of peace. I don't have peace. He says, I have forgotten what happiness is. Because in those dark moments, that's how it feels. He says, my hope from God is gone. These are the words of the prophet Jeremiah. He's pouring out his soul. He's frustrated. He feels like God is treating him poorly. He's speaking out of pain and hurt. He's not thinking rationally, of course, but he's coming to God and he's laying everything out. He's saying, God, this is how I feel. Jeremiah said, my strength is gone. I can't keep going on. I cannot go on anymore. I am at my rope's end, God. You've taken everything away. My hope is gone. Jeremiah had this one hope, that his country might be saved. He had this one hope, that his country would turn from their wicked ways. That was his hope. That is what consumed him for 40 years. Every day when he taught people in the streets, in the palaces, in the temple, he taught people and he said, you need to turn from your evil ways, because he had the hope that they would change. And when God destroyed Judah, his hope was gone. He lost his hope. That thing that's to come that's better than now, he lost it. He's not sure if anything better is ever going to come. He thinks this is the end. And yet, in the middle of this book, in the middle of his prayer where he's pouring out his heart, where he's saying to God, God, I am at my rope's end. I am lost. I am out of strength. I can't go on. In the middle of all of it, he finds hope. He says, verse 19, remember my affliction and my wanderings, the wormwood and the gall. My soul continually remembers it and is bowed down within me. Verse 21, look at this. So you saw verse 18, right? At the very end. So my hope has perished from the Lord, right? My hope from the Lord has perished. Verse 21, but this I call to my mind, and therefore I have hope. You see that? So in one moment, he's saying, oh, my hope is gone. But then he moves on. He says, but actually, I do have hope because of this thing I'm thinking. This thing comes to my mind and it gives me hope. So in the middle of everything, he says, I have no hope. Then he says the opposite. He has this moment where he's speaking out of emotions and pain. He has this moment where he comes to his senses. His eyes are open. In the process of pouring out his heart out to God, I think God works within his heart to make him see the truth. One thing that gives us hope. And I think we need to take note of this. Because when you're in a low point, I want you to remember this passage. When you're at a low point, I want you to remember the context of this passage. That Jeremiah is at his lowest point. Jeremiah had a lot of low points. And so it's pretty significant that this is the lowest point he's ever had. A point where he thinks there is no hope. A point where he thinks he's about to die. And so when you're in the middle of your lamentations, when you're grieving, when you're mourning, you need to remember these words. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is God's faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I will what? I will hope in Him. Jeremiah has changed his tune. Because he remembered this, that no matter how bad things are, God is good. That God's love never ceases. The nation of Judah may cease, but God's love never ceases. Because Jeremiah, deep in his soul, he knows that when you have God, you have hope. When God is what you have, when God is your portion, when everything you have is just God, you have all you need. When God is your portion, you will see good days again. And so at a time when Jeremiah saw his country destroyed, his brethren killed, and him being taken as a prisoner of a war, he's going to be a slave for the rest of his life. And all of this could have been prevented if they just listened to him. That's a hopeless situation. And Jeremiah said, my hope is in God's unceasing love. And I think this is a great example of hope in a hopeless situation. When dark clouds surrounded Jeremiah, God's love was that sliver of bright light. In this hopeless situation, there is God. You remember that experiment with the rats, where if they had a light, they swam for so much longer. Because when you don't have hope, you give up. But when God's hope is like that bright light, it keeps you going. God's love is a sign of hope in a gloomy and unfortunate situation, because no matter how bad life got, and for Jeremiah, it got really, really bad, God was the source of hope. And I want to add the other verses he adds on to this. So we know this one. He says, but this I call to my mind, and therefore I have hope. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I will hope in Him. He continues. The Lord is good to those who wait for Him, to the soul who seeks Him. It is good that one should wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. It is good for a man that he bear the yoke in his youth. Let him sit alone in silence when it is laid on him. Let him put his mouth in the dust, that there may yet be hope. Let him give his cheek to the one who strikes, and let him be filled with insults. For the Lord will not cast off forever, but though he cause grief, He will have compassion according to the abundance of His steadfast love. For He does not afflict from His heart or grieve the children of men. So Jeremiah, he compares his terrible situation to a young man who's being disciplined, a young man who's going through very difficult times. You see, Judah, the country, was like a young man that needs discipline. So discipline implies a future, right? Discipline is done so that their future may be better for children. God's people are being disciplined, not destroyed. God caused hardships. You hear in His words, Jeremiah says, though God does cause grief, He has compassion. Though God will discipline, He won't destroy. And so God, for these countries, for Judah, He took everything away to try to teach them the lesson of what is most important. He said, why are you trusting in your wealth? Well, okay, I'll take away your wealth. See how much you trust it. Why are you trusted in all this and all this and all this and all this? You're like, you know what? I'm just going to take it all away. So you finally get it straight in your head that your hope lies in God. And it's in those darkest moments for us people when you realize, when you don't have anything left, when you are powerless, when you are hopeless, that you realize what you should have been hoping in all along. God. God's the source of hope. And when all those other things can be removed, you learn you can't hope in them. In our lives, are you going to need that lesson drilled into you? Or are you just going to learn it? God might put you in a situation where you have to realize this. God might put you in a situation where you don't have any hope besides Him. Because when you have Him, you have hope. The idols Judah had didn't save them. The money they had didn't save them. The alliances they made didn't save them. The kings they had didn't save them. The only actual genuine hope they had was God. And that's how it is for us. The Lord is good to those who wait for Him. The country of Judah had to learn this lesson. They had to learn it time and time and time and time and time and time again. They just could not get it through their skulls. And I look at that and I ask myself, what about me? What about us? What about the United States of America? What about us as individuals? Because God's patient, but He does discipline, right? And when you don't get it through your head, sometimes the discipline has to be amped up. And we're just trying to get it through your head. God's not trying to do it to destroy you. He's not trying to afflict from His heart. He's not trying to grieve the children of men. He's trying to teach you a lesson. To just rely on Him. If we wait for the Lord, if we seek Him, we have hope. Jeremiah, in this hopeless situation, left alone in silence, someone striked him on the cheek, hurled insults, but it didn't matter. He had hope. Why? The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. You're going to go into points in your life where you don't have anything. But Jeremiah said, if I have God, then I have everything. If I have God, that's all I need. All this other stuff, just extra. But sometimes God will take it all away to remind you. It's God that you need to be hoping in. And I'm trying to tell myself, don't hope in all this other stuff. Don't hope in that bank account. Don't hope in all these other things. Hope in God. Maybe God won't take it all away then. Learn the lesson before you have to be disciplined. I'm just saying. When God's all you have, you realize you have all you need. That's the lesson I got out of all of this, and that's the lesson I wanted to give to you. When God is all you have, God is all you need. God's love never stops. It never ends. His love is brand new every day. He will never abandon you. If you have God, you have hope. Jeremiah said, God is what I have, but it's all I need, and I have hope.